Bit tight. There it is.
Thumbs
There it is.
up.
There
All
it
right.
is. Okay. So,
I'll be
all
on.
right. We are streaming everywhere. Welcome to everybody who is streaming in online from all the various platforms. I am Aubrey Fuller, and I am doing our Eros Revolution podcast talk today on part 2 of Christianity and Eros, or the resurgence of Christianity in the West, or Jesus and Eros. Because I'm just so into this topic. I did this last week, and then I cut some clips from my talk, and then me and Maya Gilbert, who's my really good friend and collaborator on all things creative, we were like, this is such a great topic. We have to make an Eros Revolution. I have this Eros Revolution series on my social media, and where we have, it has like a little intro and a title music and all this cool stuff in it, and so we made an episode 3 out of this whole topic, because I can't stop talking. I'm just so interested in it now. And so now this episode, or this podcast day, was rolling around, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to do a part 2. And then I was in practice this morning, and I got this whole download, and then after I wrote the whole thing out, and I have notes today. Like, I'm not even a note person most of the time. Like, I kind of like get the download, and then I'll write some bullets down or something like that. But I mostly, oh, there we go. So anyway, Jesus and Eros part 2. So the first half of my talk it's a sermon. It's a biblically supported sermon. That is like channeled straight from the many, many hours I have spent in Christian churches throughout my life. So I grew up Christian, and then I also will still go to Christian churches sometimes, from time to time, sometimes with my dad, sometimes with other friends, do the worship music and everything. Been to Hillsong, definitely. I like to go and kind of take a peek in there, because that was the foundation of what I grew up in, and so there's a certain like deep familiarity to all of the language of it, and the rituals of it, and the songs and the vibe. The certain smell of coffee and perfume so distinct to church. Like, it is so distinct to church. I can smell it. I can literally smell it by memory right now. But yeah, we're going to dive in today. So I want to start with this idea that Jesus had, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but there's like the missing 18 years. There's the missing 18 years in the life of Jesus. There's the time that he's mentioned in the Gospel of Luke at age 12 in the Temple of Jerusalem, engaging with elders. And then the next mention is of a 30-year-old Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist, beginning his public ministry. And the New Testament does not provide details about this 18-year period, which is why it's referred to as the missing years. I mean, it has a lot of different names. There's a lot of different books about it, and there's a lot of different theories about it. But I find that really interesting, because part of my talk today is going to be about how Jesus was both a man, a human, just a person, and also divine. And that there's nothing different, in a sense, between him and us in that way. There's a potential for something great. And maybe he was born for it. It depends on what your beliefs are and where you're coming from on it. Like a traditional Christian would believe he was born specifically for the purpose that he succeeded in his life on the planet. But there's this 18-year period where he was being a person on the planet doing stuff that nobody knows for sure about. And I find that really fascinating. And so there's some pretty like traditional and kind of scholarly views of this. The most common and accepted view is that Jesus lived a relatively normal life in his hometown of Nazareth. 18 years. What did that look like? What was he doing? Carpentry, probably, like, did he get married? We don't know, like, I don't know. Like, that's a long time, right? So even a normal life in his hometown of Nazareth could have been pretty interesting, right? carpentry. He was thought to have worked as a carpenter, following in the trade of his earthly father, Joseph. So maybe just doing that, right? Learning mastery of that. Spiritual development. He likely grew in wisdom and spiritual understanding, as noted in the biblical passage, advanced in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. So the traditional and scholarly views are kind of basic like that, right? And then there's speculative theories, and these are kind of the middle, the kind of middle fun ones. Some theories suggest that Jesus traveled to distant lands to study with Eastern mystics in places like India, Persia, or the Middle East, as described in alternative historical narratives and texts. Other narratives claim he visited Britain, possibly with Joseph of Arimathea, which he has also been linked to in Legends of the Holy Grail. So there's different story, Myths of Avalon has Jesus come through Britain in it, it's fiction, but it's like, there's this idea that maybe he took a tour over there in those 18 years. And the thing that I think about a lot is, I think why I had this download and practice this morning, I practiced Tibetan Buddhism, and we were in a Tibetan Buddhist practice this morning, going through a sadhana and doing mantras and visualizations and things. And I was thinking how at the most basic level of those teachings and the teachings of Christianity, you get a lot of the foundational same things. And I was thinking specifically, so with Tibetan Buddhism and Vajrayana Buddhism, you move from seeing like the deity energy that you're working with as something over there outside of you that you're connected to. So there's not separation, but it's not exactly you. You move into actually arising as the deity in this level of Tibetan Buddhism. And all of it is kind of to get to that place where you're actually arising as the deity. And so whatever deity you're working with, whatever sadhana you're working with, there's a point in it where you arise as Yamataka, or you arise as Vajrayogini, or you arise as Manjushri, and you become the deity, and you imagine and visualize yourself in that position. And for some schools of thought, that's kind of controversial. And I think definitely for a lot of Christians, it's really controversial to think of that with Jesus. Like there's this set apartness to God and Christ, and, like he was divine. He was only divine. We look up to him. We're just sinners of the flesh that could never achieve that level of divinity is something I heard a lot in church in different ways. But I think what it is that I don't think people like to talk about those missing 18 years that much, because they don't like to imagine that he was simply a man who, as well as being divine, who needed and valued maybe teachers and schooling. Maybe he did travel around, and he actually did a lot of work and learned a lot of things in order to become the being that he became, that, as I like to put it, opened a dimension of unconditional love on the planet. I don't think a lot of Christians are comfortable with seeing him as a man as well as divine. And I think there's a specific reason for that. I think there's a fear in seeing that there is actually no divide between us and him. And the fear would be really of work. Because if there's no divide, then your work becomes to be like, your work as a Christian becomes to be like Jesus. Not many Christians would argue with that statement, but really when you think about the actual work involved, it's like, I made this little note here, like, I doubt he ever, these are my thoughts, I doubt he ever wanted followers. He probably just wanted fellow holders of the love and power he was bringing into the world. Followers tend to put all the work onto the one that they follow. Fellow holders carry the load with the one who woke them up to the deeper path. They walk alongside and they carry the weight of it with them. And all true leaders that I've ever known don't really like followers, like, because they tend to put all the work on that person and kind of like separate themselves from them. and they're not necessarily carrying the weight of this vision alongside them, and certainly not an equal amount of the weight. And so I don't know. I think because I grew up Christian in like a practical, down to earth kind of way, you know, like I've talked about my relationship with my dad and the conversations that we have around his belief system. He's a staunch Christian, has been my whole life. But he's a Christian in a practical way. He definitely has some like rigidly held beliefs and ideas and things around it, but he also has a very real, active, alive relationship with Jesus and what that represents to him daily in his life, which I don't think all Christians have. And so there's this work to be done as a Christian to be actually like Jesus. There is no divide there. He was both a man and divine, just as we are. We are human and divine. We have potential to be that as well. And so, oh, I have Bible verses for you guys. So, okay, Hannah, we're doing a for real sermon, guys. Hannah, I need you to bring up Genesis 1:26 through 1:27. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Okay. And then bring up Colossians? Colossians 1:15. Thank you. He, Christ, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. So Christ is the image of God. Man was made in the image of God. Okay, we're seeing a pattern here. And then bring up oh, that's pretty. This one's pretty. 2 Corinthians 3:18. And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. Okay. So, and this was like, I picked like, 5 or whatever from at least 20 or something that I found that kind of refer to this idea that, Jesus is made in the image of God, man is made in the image of God. We're looking to strive to be like God in some way, right? Like we're not separate from it. There's actually a lot of emphasis on not being separate from it. And so actually, and then I have a couple more actually, because one second, I really like this one. Hold on. Okay, so do the Ephesians one, Ephesians 4:11.
I don't have that one.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, so Ephesians 4:11. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. I don't know. It's like this language is very specific and but it's really beautiful. I can't help but feel how the transmission of like the real transmission of Christianity and what it's rooted in is this like when I read those particular verses, there's something that I feel come through my body that's a real transmission of something powerful. And this is what I talked about in the last video. Like there's a resurgence of Christianity in the West right now. And you know, it's so funny because I talked about this conversation I had with a really good friend of mine about her beautiful experience with Jesus recently and coming into the Christian church and really like beginning a whole path there and a relationship there. And I was just talking to another friend in another voice memo today who I haven't talked to in forever. And while it's definitely not exactly that kind of experience, she was like, I caught that video of yours yesterday. And it's so funny because I was just having this thought a few days ago, like, maybe I should look into Jesus again, you know? And I was like, it's really everywhere, you know, it's really, there is just like this huge resurgence. There's this huge desire for the power of this particular transmission and this particular energy and sort of the healing, cleansing element of it to wash through and kind of bring like a reset to the world or something. You know, there's like a deep yearning for something to wash through and like wash out all of the insanity and the tumescence, you know, we would call it on the erotic path, and to right the wrongs and, you know, bring inspiration and hope and fuel and food and to alleviate the suffering and, you know, all of the things that are at the root, you know, part of like what Jesus taught and, you know, what Christianity is based in. And as I said in my last video, you know, I love that. Like, I understand the yearning for that. And I love a resurgence of it, you know, and my whole thing as a representative of Eros in the world and, you know, a woman who is spreading the good word of Eros with her, you know, one precious life. That's what I'm doing here. And as someone who's doing that and looking at, you know, the history of how surges and resurgences of Christianity usually go specifically in relationship to Eros. My whole thing is, let's have a resurgence of Christianity, but let's do it with a deep, enduring, steadfast respect for the erotic this time. Let's really nail that one this time as a human race. And maybe not build the resurgence and the reconnection to Jesus and Christ consciousness on a divorce from the erotic, but rather a deeper marriage with it. And I've said this before, everything Jesus did, everything he said, everything I've ever read about how he conducted himself as a person and as a divine source of God and an opener of the dimension of unconditional love on the planet and a holder of that was super erotic. Super erotic. And the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about the erotic or about Eros in the way that this philosophy that I'm all about teaches it is that it is all about having extreme respect for the power, like the nuclear power of erotic energies, and learning to work with them in an adult way, not to go to this end of the spectrum and pretend like they could be suppressed, that they could be eternally restrained, that they could be cut off at the knees, or go to this side and imagine that erotic energies could be not dealt with at all, that we're just dragged around by them, you know, lustfully or addictively or whatever, which I think those experiences have a lot of value. And I have a sutra for you guys today too, an Eros sutra that I'm going to show us as well, that I want to go into, that kind of talks about that a little bit. But there's like these two sides, right? And you can fall into this side or you can fall into this side. And as all things that have to do with liberation are, there's a sweet spot, dynamic middle, a moving target that's a bit of both and neither. That's all that you're always looking for that. And that's where the adult relationship with erotic energies exists, is finding that sweet spot and learning how to live your life from that place. And it's funny because I feel like this is the aspect of Christianity that Christians don't talk about, don't realize as much, and really would do well to become more intimate with. And then this is the aspect that we work with in, Eros and in this philosophy quite a bit. And so I feel like there could be such an incredibly powerful marriage here that in a way was never, it's like there was a divorce, but there wasn't. I don't know. When I feel into the transmission of Jesus, like through different verses and stuff, Bible verses and things, or stories, when I feel into that transmission, it gels completely with Eros. Like I don't, to me, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Everything you're saying makes perfect sense, but I can also see how the way that it's written in, the way that it's been translated, like the way that it can be received through a lot of different kinds of like lenses and a lot of intense interpretations can have it end up feeling very different than how it may have been originally intended. I personally think just because of who Jesus was, and again, this is kind of going back to like my dad's download to me of Jesus, who's like his homeboy, that's how he relates to him. But Jesus was the one who taught people how to care about other people, how to like feed the poor and take care of the elderly and like make sure that you're being a good person in the world who's actually getting your attention off of yourself and looking around you to see who needs what. He's the one who fed a crowd with like 1 bread loaf and 3 fish or something like that. Like he's the one who brought the joyful libations of turning water into wine, like he's the one who hung out with all people from all walks of life, from government people to, kings and rulers, all the way down to, like the homeless and the prostitutes and, then just like everybody in between. Like there was no one that he didn't hang out with, except that one time he whipped the bankers, I guess. But other than that, there was no one that he didn't hang out with. He was someone who lived in the example of how he lived, not the example of how millions and millions of people have decided it meant what this and that and the other thing since then. In the example of how he lived, which is, the Bible verses I picked out are about living that way also, like removing the divide between you and Jesus as a Christian and actually seeking to live like Jesus lived, live as that example, not in your head in the ideas about, who he was and how it should go. And I think in the absence of doing the work to have an active, alive, in the moment, day-to-day devotional relationship with that actual energy, like where you're listening and you're obeying and you're listening and you're seeking to align and orient and be exactly congruent with that energy coming through, kind of alive, right? That unconditional love energy of Christ. Like in the absence of having an active, alive, day-to-day relationship with that, what happens is, in a compensatory way, a bunch of rules and regulations replace that alive relationship instead. And it becomes a dogma, and it becomes, a whole set of traditions and structures and containers and rules and all of that. And it kind of devolves into that. And the thing is that those things can be really cool too. I mean, that's a religion, all of those things, that's a religion. It can be really beautiful, but only if it's being informed by its participants and parishioners being actively in a relationship with Jesus moment to moment. And being in connection to that unconditional love transmission as much as possible, and then feeding that into the structures so that they're a reflection of that. If that alive relationship is absent, it's like a, I think I used this metaphor before, but it's like a hermit crab where the crab moved out of that shell into a whole other shell and then is completely living somewhere else now. And there's all these people still being like, this shell, not really realizing that it's empty. And I think that's what happens a lot with religion. That's what happens a lot with Christianity. The whole thing that can be this really dynamic, alive relationship with something that is constantly renewing your entire being and having you be a source of unconditional love on the planet. When that gets lost, there's just an empty going through the motions. This actually reminds me of an Eros Sutra about practice. We're not going to look at this one today, but it's called Duty and Desire, and it's essentially about how sometimes we have great, big, passionate desires for things in our lives, and then we get them, and then we have them for a while, and then we forget how much we wanted them, and then they become burdensome, and then we, go through the motions of doing our task list of duty on the thing that we once desired so deeply, and so it's a lot like that. It's like part of the work of, being a source of this thing on the planet is to constantly be in contact with the energy as much as possible so that you're always renewing yourself as a clear channel for that thing to come through. See, you can see like Eros, Christianity, Tibetan Buddhism, all of them, there's just so much common ground, really. They're all kind of saying the same thing. Okay, so I just check. I got most of those things. Yep, rules and regulations. Okay, so I wanted to look at 2 sutras today. So let me think. Let's look at the mystical state one first. The healing is a byproduct of contact with the mystical state, I think it's called, of the mystical state. Okay. So in Eros, we start with perfection and we end with perfection. But here in the middle of our journey, it can be challenging to find that perspective, so often blocked by our trauma. This sutra is from the Tumescence volume 2 of the Eros Sutras, just so you guys know, number 71 in that volume. Our traumas are widely disregarded as immutable features of our inner landscape, and the solutions we are offered are only coping mechanisms at best, or at worst, render the power hidden within the walls of our trauma inert. So let's see. Eros effectively, this is such a powerful line. Eros effectively liberates trauma through the mystical experience. So this is why I want to look at this one, because another absolutely foundational thing that is at the root of this erotic philosophy, also Christianity, also Tibetan Buddhism, also Islam, also Judaism. I mean, you name it. You name a spirituality or a religion, and this is at the root, and that is having touched the mystical state. You would call it by different names depending on what belief system you're coming from, but we're talking about having a powerful experience of tapping into or accessing or touching into or immersing into the mystical state. And from within the mystical state, trauma is liberated, healing occurs, tumescence is converted, suffering is alleviated. The torture of all of like trying to function, having labeled yourself and your life with all of these different names and identities and things is dissolved, and you're able to get back to your essence. There's a whole experience that happens when you come into contact with the mystical state that is genuinely deeply transformative. And all of these different, spiritualities and religions and philosophies are they're generally aiming to get you there. They definitely were built, they were inspired by at least one person, if not many, many people having gotten there through the modes of that spirituality or that religion or whatever it is, and touching that place, and then wanting everybody to have access to it. That's where it starts. But then the thing that gets built around that can go a little bit awry unless you're having a consistent, alive relationship with that, whatever that energy is that you call it in your belief system. Unless you're having a consistent relationship with that and you're getting to immerse in the mystical state one way or another and renew your connection to source energy, for lack of a better description, then the structures that, you know, get wrapped around that spirituality that were once a really beautiful expression of the absolute divine joy that someone experienced from within that mystical state that that particular spirituality got them to, that structure becomes first empty. It begins to lose meaning. And then it just becomes kind of a constrictive set of rules and regulations that don't really reflect an immediate knowing of that thing anymore. And then somehow those rules and regulations always have to do with murdering Eros. Somehow, right? So, okay, so let's look at the other sutra. It's know the truth to know the delusion, I think is what it's called. Yeah, so just bringing that up. Okay, know the delusion to know the truth. So this one really addresses, like, if anyone here or anyone who's tuned in or anyone or anyone that you guys are talking to is ever like, why on your guys's path do you go, why so much talk about sexuality, why so much talk about power, you know, like why so much talk about money, why do you deal with any of those things at all? Like, what is the, you know, like why are you so controversial? Why does everything you guys do have to be so controversial? It's like, I'll speak for myself. If it was, I'd love for it not to be. Like, it'd be fine if it wasn't. I'm not looking to, you know, drum up controversy. Okay. Like, it'd be fine if it wasn't. It'd be totally fine. And this sutra is a really great one about why it's controversial and why we go into those places all the time. So the path of Eros can be confounding because it asks us to enter the profane areas of life with zero avoidance. Sex, money, and power being our three biggest torments. Eros wants us to drive straight into the center of these areas as they are most rife with delusion and difficulty. We would rather avoid them altogether for fear of being swept away. So this, to me, you know, there's so many different things to say about this, but the first thing that comes to mind is there's this paragraph is describing two different kinds of Christians. And I think my dad would agree with me if he was here. So Eros wants us to drive straight into the center of these areas as they are most rife with delusion and difficulty. So that would be the type of, that's Jesus. He drove straight into the center of these areas. He drove straight into the center, or, you know, rode a horse in on the center of the areas that were most rife with delusion and difficulty. He went, you know, he traveled around to all these different places. He talked to all the different people. He went into all the different kinds of homes, you know, poor, rich, whatever. He went everywhere, into every place. He went to the people who had leprosy, the sick and the dying from all different kinds of things. You know, he had the people stop stoning the adulterous. Like, he went to all of the places where he even went in the end of his journey. Some say it was the beginning, you know, that his death was the beginning. But he went at the end of his human journey, he went straight to the place that he basically knew he was going to be crucified, you know. And so he would always go into the areas, to the people and the places and the situations and the experiences that were most rife with delusion and difficulty and pain and suffering and tumescence, as us erotic people would say, with no hesitation whatsoever, and did his ministries in those places and did his work in those places, and led by example a lot more than just teaching too. Like, he would do his talks, but he would go in and he would heal the sick, and he would sit with the dying, and he would converse and have food and meals and wine with all the people, and like totally immerse as a man among men. And then could you bring it back up? Great that you took it down while I was running my mouth, but if you could bring it back up. And then, so that's one kind of Christian. That's the kind of Christian who seeks to actually be like Jesus instead of separate from Jesus, therefore let off the hook of the work that he did that we could all be doing as well. The other kind of Christian is, we would rather avoid them altogether for fear of being swept away. And this type of Christian is the type that ends up creating a whole lot of rules and regulations around the erotic and the energies of the erotic. There's a terror of being swept away and losing control and not being able to properly harness and navigate and work with those energies, which is a rightful fear, because it does take a lot of work to grow skill and resilience with working with erotic energies. It takes a deep level of courage and willingness to look foolish and to mess up a lot and to go into the areas that are most rife with delusion and difficulty, and to go right into that place where you have the most aversion to going, because you're just like, I'm terrified to see who I am there, or I'm going to look so stupid, or like, I'm totally going to lose my footing there and mess everything up and everybody's going to hate me. Or like, if I say that, I'm going to get canceled. You know, if I bring these teachings into the world, I'm going to end up in jail. You know, it's like a very real fear of being swept away in a skilllessness in working with erotic energies. I understand, I really do. And in the exact same way that I consistently speak to myself and speak to my friends in Eros and encourage all of us to find the courage and the wherewithal to keep being the living by example and being the type of erotic person who goes right into the territories rife with delusion and difficulty just head on. I am extending that to all Christians everywhere. And saying, learn how, and this is to everybody. This is to Christians, this is to Eros people, this is to the Muslims and the Jews and the Buddhists and the Hindus and the agnostics and the atheists. This is just everyone. We need to learn how to work with erotic energies like adults. It's time. It's just time. And we need to rework the level of rules and regulations and constriction on the erotic in a way that is still congruent with the deeper transmission of these spiritualities and these belief systems. And in order to do that, we're going to have that deeper relationship with the original energy of those religions and spiritualities. And because I fully believe that, I can feel the truth of it, that those energies don't have an issue with Eros. They just don't. because those energies, those transmissions, those masters, those beings, you know, their part of their mastery is a certain practicality with using anything and everything well to reach these deeper divine states, these mystical states, to go beyond the veil of this world of appearances and break through into the deeper reality. They use anything and everything to be able to do that. And there's just no way in heck that they wouldn't utilize the nuclear power of erotic energies for that purpose as well. And that is exactly what we're doing here in Eros. There's every sutra, every teaching, all of the things that we do here and on this path, you know, Nicole Dadone's whole body of work, all of it is teaching the mechanics of every which way you possibly can to be as intimate as possible with that deeper source energy or that transmission, and how to be as intimate as possible with it and in alignment with it and perfectly congruent with it, and how to like hear it really deeply and discern and trust and then obey it and be a source of it coming into the world. And at the bottom of all of it is an unconditional love. And so this erotic philosophy, all of this, it's the purpose of it is to gift this planet with the much needed, very intricate instructions on how to be intimate with that source energy, so that you can constantly be in contact with it. And, you know, it can be applied into any spirituality and any religion, really. It's not, in a way, it's its whole own belief system, but it's also, it's like adding salt to food as well. You know, it's also kind of like salt, and it brings out the flavor of each of the things. And it gives you a lens to fully be able to actually see the beauty of each of those locations. And it's like an incredible thing that can be added to any other thing to completely evoke that thing's deepest meaning and beauty. And it's just high time. It's just high time that we do that. We gotta get into an adult relationship with erotic energies. We just gotta. You know, and we gotta rework some of the structures that are in place that are foundationally built on trying to eradicate and suppress and, you know, divorce from the erotic, because it's not evil. It's not even dangerous. It gets a terrible reputation for being dangerous because it's like nuclear power. It's incredibly powerful. It does have to be worked with, learned from the inside out, and then harnessed and plugged into things in order for it to be utilized to reach mystical states. Like, yes, you do have to learn how to do that. And it's like a bucking horse or something. Like, if you don't know how to, you know, if you don't learn how to handle it, it will buck you off. And then you're like, see, it's dangerous, right? And so it gets this bad rap and this terrible reputation for being like evil or dangerous, but it's not. It's the life in life. It's the meaning of life. See, this truck outside agrees with me. It's literally the meaning of life. It's the color of life. It's everything good about life is Eros flowing through it. Okay, that is what I have. I'm going to just check if there are any questions from online. 1 second, please. Someone said, what do you do to enhance your energy? That's interesting. Someone's curious about this notion of adult relationship. Okay, so enhance your energy. I mean, kind of no matter what you mean by that question, it's going to be the same answer. So personally, and for many of us on this erotic path, orgasmic meditation or oming is what we do to enhance our energy. I'm not making fun of you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make it like enhance, like that's a stupid question or something. I think it's a great question. I practice orgasmic meditation to strengthen and enhance my energy, my sense of resilience, to learn the mechanics of the erotic from the inside out at a sustainable pace. You know, I remember when I had my first OM and I started to realize this was my path and this was my calling. And it's not for everybody. You can also just have an OM practice and it doesn't have to be like your path or your calling or a huge deal. It can also just be a cool addition to your life. Like not everybody's like me, but I remember when I first had an OM and I had that experience, I had this really beautiful moment where I was like, because I did grow up Christian and I did have, you know, I talk to God and I still call it God sometimes now. And at the time that I first came in to orgasmic meditation, I would, you know, talk to God a lot and I was doing a lot of psychedelics and stuff too. And I remember talking to someone and I was like, oh, how could it even, my God must love me so much that my path to awakening is clitoris stroking. Like, could anything be more loving or perfect? Like, it's like it was designed specifically for me in the most loving way possible. I can't even imagine that this is my path. So, like, mind blowing. It was mind blowing. But yeah, orgasmic meditation is what I do. And we have classes to learn it on erosplatform.com every 3 weeks ish or something. So definitely, if you're interested in learning that practice, sign up for that class on the Eros platform. And then the other question was the adult relationship thing. So by adult relationship, I mean like having a relationship with it that's having an adult relationship with erotic energies means being willing to not just completely tip into the two sides that I described, the one or the other. So there's the like letting it, not learning it at all, and just kind of like being dragged by the horse, you know, and letting it just drag you around, and not having any skill with it or anything. And it drags you into lust and it drags you into porn addiction and it drags you into all kinds of places where you don't really want to go and all these things. Although I really do feel like each and every one of those things has a ton of value. Every one of those domains and worlds has so much value. I mean, we have, you know, the Art of Addiction program is such an incredible program that we do. And lust is an incredible teacher, you know, like, do I want to live there forever? No. Am I glad that I've become liberated from a lot of where I used to feel dragged around by it? Yes. But like, do I regret any of those experiences? No, absolutely not. Like a lot of it was fun and a lot of it was torture. And that's part of how you learn Eros from the inside out, is you get dragged around, you know. But the idea is like not to just go on autopilot and like live your life in kind of just a, you know, have a need, have a desire, like fill it. Hungry, eat, like in Buddhism, it'd be called the animal realm, you know, it's just constantly sort of appeasing your instincts. And so just that's one side. And then the other side is trying to, you know, suppress, restrain, kill, divorce, cut off Eros completely, you know, intensely control it. And so you need both. And the dynamic sweet spot between the two is where liberation is. Like that is an adult relationship with Eros, an adult relationship with sexual energies, erotic energies, is learning that dynamic moving target of a sweet spot between those two ends of the spectrum. Yes. And then that's it. Those are all the questions that are on there. So I am going to wrap up, and let me just think if I have any other. Oh my God. I know you guys only put this on here because it was funny, but someone said, do you believe in threesomes? And I just think that's so funny. So you guys should watch. The person who said that, and everyone should watch Nicole's whole series on like arousal practice and consort practice and stuff, because there's a really interesting take on that. It's like the idea of a threesome taken to the level of utilizing something like that for the deepest, most liberation aim of the planet, you know, and it's so good. She did so many talks this last year. And actually all of those are available. All of that content is available on erosplatform.com with premium membership, I believe. So yes, check those out. They are absolutely incredible. And thanks, Harold. Harold said, great sermon today. I was joking when I read those, like, I think my whole life has been for this. I could really take this to some preacher levels if I get really good at it. But yeah, I really enjoyed that, bringing early Aubrey Christian world, late Aubrey Eros world, and just fully uniting them, you know. But that is a signature of Eros, doing that with seemingly opposing things and discovering they're not opposing at all. They are deep friends, and it's only up here in our strange tumescent world of ideas that we imagine that they're not fundamentally the same thing, and that the relationship between the two could be elevated to the level of art and could be a really fascinating thing to collectively create together and see how it could be expressed in this next age, in the age of Eros, in the resurgence of Christianity in the West, and the age of Eros. All right, you guys, signing off for now until next week. This talk will be available in its entirety on the Eros platform sometime later today.